Alan Charles Kors, our honoree tonight, specializes in European intellectual history of the 17th and 18th centuries, with a general interest in the intellectual transformation of European thought and the relationships between orthodox and heterodox thought in France after 1650. He has written extensively regarding early modern French intellectual history, and he was the editor-in-chief of the Encyclopedia of the Enlightenment. Dr. Kors served on the National Council for the Humanities, was a Phi Beta Kappa visiting scholar, and has won both the Lindback Award and the Ira Abrams Memorial Award for Distinguished College Teaching, as well as several national awards for the defense of academic freedom. In 2005, at the White House just down the street, he received the National Humanities Medal. His two latest works are Naturalism and Disbelief in France, 1650 to 1729, and Epicureans and Atheists in France, 1650 to 1729, both on Cambridge University Press, and completing a trilogy on the diverse origins of atheism in early modern France. So please welcome our first panelist, Dr. Alan Charles Kors.
The French philosophes, it's the French word for philosopher, but adopted by thinkers of the French Enlightenment. The French philosophers faced a culture in which the abusive power of some over others, religiously, politically, socially, was part of the presumptive authority of the past against which they struggled. One of the hardest things to communicate to students teaching the Enlightenment is the difference between a rejection of authority and a rejection against the presumptive authority of the past. And it's led to many a misunderstanding of Enlightenment views. They certainly believe in authority that needs criteria to establish, for example, intellectual authority. But the mere fact of survival in a society does not give that presumptive authority any special meaning, its presence any special meaning. The Enlightenment rejects all notions that whatever is should be continued in society. It's the mark of a traditionalist society to fear that things will get worse if you change. One of the remarkable aspects of the late 17th and then the 18th century in Europe, and particularly in France and in England, is the emergence of a view that things can get better. And when things can get better, then models of authority stand in need of justification. By the early decades of the 18th century, the French philosophers looked longingly to Britain for models of a freer, more innovative, and more decent society. This was true not only of the celebrated Montesquieu's account of balances and separations of power, but of the work of the most influential of all French thinkers, Voltaire, who in his Letters from England, his Lettres philosophiques, presented religious toleration and voluntary exchange as mutually reinforcing goods that brought prosperity and peace to Britain. His glowing description of the Royal Exchange in London was a celebration of individual freedom and voluntary commerce and exchange. At the end of his letter on the Presbyterians, in which he has dealt with the English Civil War, religious fratricide, the hatred of the clergy in 17th and early 18th century Britain for each other, he presents us the stock exchange. Quote, "You will see representatives of all the people gathered there for the benefit of humanity. There, the Jew, the Muslim, and the Christian deal with each other as if they shared the same religion, and they reserve the name infidel only for those who go bankrupt." There, the Presbyterian trusts the Anabaptist, the Mennonite, and the Anglican accepts the promise of the Quaker, end quote. The exchange was a scene of, quote, peaceful and free assemblies, after which individuals made voluntary choices about their private religious lives. Voltaire drew the following conclusion: if there were only one religion in England, there would be danger of despotism. If there were two religions, they would cut each other's throats. But there are 30 religions, and they live together in peace and happiness, end quote. What was English for Voltaire was the religious toleration so essential to the needs of a commercial Britain emerging from generations of political instability and religious hatreds and anathematizations. England had recognized that peace and mutual forbearance were immeasurably superior to the creedal fratricide of prior centuries. Using England as a foil to criticize France, Voltaire presented a vision of a society in which laws rather than men's wills rule. Civil liberties are every citizen's right, regardless of birth or rank. Religious tolerance ends the fanatical civil strife of persecuting churches and sects. A society in which commercial prosperity allows the individual to serve his own interest while enriching the society at large, and in which the arts and sciences, freed from restraint, are given the freedom to flourish. He stressed the constitutional nature of the British monarchy, the liberty that flows from a government of law, not whim, equality of taxation, the comfortable lot of the English yeoman compared to the French peasant burdened by almost all taxation, under liberty and law in the greatness, prosperity, and peacefulness of a tolerant England engaged in productive commerce. These are all themes that Montesquieu had engaged in the 1720s in his Persian letters. He has an epistolary novel of Persian visitors to France, commenting on life in France, in Europe, and the difference between the two cultures. Montesquieu often compared via these letters the Persians favorably to the French, but not in their treatment of women, which became a metaphor for despotism. Here's the voice of despotism in its purity as Montesquieu's Persian traveler, Uzbek, wholly blind to his own despotism, so sensitive to every abuse of power in Europe, writing to his chief eunuch about his harem and slaves, quote, "And what are you but mere tools, which I can break at will, who exist only insofar as you can obey, who are in the world only to live under my laws or to die as soon as I command it, and who finally can have no other destiny but submission." For Montesquieu, it was part of human nature to be aware of all abuses of power but one's own, which is why, of course, one chooses to limit power itself. Despotism was always the enemy. Enlightened despotism would have been an oxymoron for French Enlightenment thinkers. Diderot's patroness, Catherine II, asked for his formal responses to her proposals for reform of Russia. Diderot was frank, quote, "There can be no true civilization, laws, population, agriculture, trade, wealth, science, taste, or art where liberty does not exist." Her refusal to address serfdom, he said, was, quote, "an acceptance of slavery." The only equality worthy of the name, he lectured her, was when, quote, Citizens unequal in power, strength, and every kind of means should all be equal before the law. The past had been phantasmagoric when Enlightenment thinkers looked back over recent centuries in Europe, and the focus upon what institutions to preserve was under debate in a way that Voltaire found inappropriate, namely judging by original intention. And for Voltaire, it was crucial for folks to understand that even if the genesis of what is good was not itself always admirable, one judges by the effect of things upon human life and well-being. Historical consequences, even if wholly unintended, can matter much, much more than intentions. In his campaign on behalf of inoculation against smallpox, Voltaire confessed that the practice arose in Turkey because Circassian families wished to sell their daughters more expensively into the sex trade. But the origin was irrelevant to the evaluation of a beneficent innovation looking at the English death tables since inoculation was introduced. Similarly, for Voltaire, English liberties had not arisen from a desire for liberty. Magna Carta was not designed to achieve limited government, but as a way for the barons to limit the power of the king over themselves. English liberty arose without long-term intention from efforts to prevent particular abuses. Creating protections against the abuse of power, it turned out, paid modal benefits across the generations. Think on that every time you hear slave owners wrote the Bill of Rights coming from a college professor. The human mind, as Hayek famously put it 2 centuries later, cannot foresee its own progress, but civilizations and nations evolve, learn, and achieve what they never could plan. For Voltaire, a backward China now had been a great civilization while the West had lived in barbarism. What had made European progress possible, Enlightenment authors agreed, was nothing inherent but Europe's ability to learn to modify what it received from the past by wisdom in the present. The great question, I should start to conclude, the great question for Montesquieu was that of human variety and natural consequence. No human society could be permanent. Each generation and civilization faced the 3 great problems of political life. Can one avoid the catastrophe of despotism? Can one achieve rights while avoiding anarchy? Can one secure a separation, balance, and mutual check of those tendencies in human society, monarchical, aristocratic, democratic, that still leave room for liberty and self-governance? Tone mattered as much in argument in the French Enlightenment, often as content. Before the Revolution, Voltaire had triumphed in so many ways. Torture had been abolished in France. Legal intolerance of French Protestants repealed right before the Revolution. Sentences of victims of judicial murder acknowledged and overturned. How could one achieve that in 1 generation of writing? If you don't know Voltaire's tone, you don't know his influence. This is how he begins his treatise on tolerance. We quickly forget the multitude of dead who have perished in countless battles. not only because death is the inevitable fate of war, but also because those who die by the sword could have inflicted death on their enemies, had the means of defending themselves. When risk and advantage are equal, death is no longer a shock, and even pity is lessened. But when an innocent father is delivered into the hands of error, passion, fanaticism, when the accused has no defense but his virtue, when those who make the decision can slaughter him without risking anything but making a mistake, when they can slay with impunity from an order from the bench, then the voice of the public is heard, and each fears for himself. They see that no man's life is safe before a court that was set up to guard the life of citizens, and all the voices join in a demand for vengeance. The unresolved tensions of the French Enlightenment indeed remain with us. What modality of power is permissible to achieve reforms? Replacing birth by merit and legal equality, how do we avoid egalitarian expectations of outcome? And can there be self-governance without a virtue? And if not, what are the durable sources of such virtue essential to self-governance? The French Enlightenment taught a civilization that mutual forbearance, commerce, peace, and prosperity go hand in hand. Lose the former, and all the rest is in peril. The foundation of liberty, its sine qua non, is resistance to all oppression of the human mind. The price of that, which we should welcome, is an endless series of debates. When Salman Rushdie emerged from his first year of hiding, from his sentence of death for offending the mullahs and Ayatollah Khomeini, he was asked what had he been doing for a year. He answered, reading a lot of Montesquieu, reading a lot of Voltaire. Thank you.